Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Walking Dead video. So here's my review for episode 3 of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon. A really, I would say, musical episode. This episode definitely had a lot of musical inspiration. There was 2 references for sure that I thought were probably, at least one reference was probably the coolest reference ever on The Walking Dead. And the other one was actually something that, if you watch the opening minutes, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I was not expecting that, but that is such a cool idea, and I'm so glad they actually did that on the show here. So before we go any further, obviously I do have to warn you for spoilers for the episode. So hopefully you guys are all aware of that. And also, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, definitely go do so. The next episode will be out on Monday. The podcast is the Empty Minds podcast. I will leave a link down below in the description if you do want to subscribe. We also are available on Spotify and Apple Music. I'm also going to be trying my best to manage videos and stuff today. I do have a birthday party today. It's my son's birthday, so I'm sort of running all of that. I woke up early today to do this review. I do have some videos that I do want to do in episode 3 and whatnot and episode 4, so I'll have 2 more later on today, but I just have to sort of manage the party and manage how I'm sort of going about all of it. And then, everything should be out though. By the time tonight's episode actually airs on cable, everything should be out basically around that point. So I just want to let you guys know that. But let's talk about the episode here. So obviously the opening minutes, first of all, I wasn't expecting this. We saw a lot of shots of this, like a lot of shots of just like Sylvie outside with Laurent, and I just wasn't expecting, the context of this scene to be that, which was I guess they ran to this random person and he had this walker band. Which at first I couldn't even believe what I was seeing, because I was watching it this morning. I was just laying there, and then all of a sudden I was like, wait, I thought that this was maybe the band stuff that they were getting into, because we were supposed to see the nightclub in this episode, and I was like, wait, this isn't the nightclub. What is this? And then you see walkers, literally, there's a walker band, and you see some walkers, the way they're tied up. There's like one that's kind of basically when it moves its arms sometimes, it'll like play the drums. Different instruments are just sort of hooked up to all these walkers, and obviously the music and the sound of it makes no sense at all, and like it is just kind of what it is. But I guess the overall sound of what it is sort of, I guess, the point of, I guess, whoever that guy is, like he was trying to make a point that this culture still lives on, you know what I mean? So it's kind of cool in some sense. That's Walker music that we just heard, right? So this was the opening credits. I really was not expecting this, and I will say, I really feel like they should upload the opening minutes like they used to. They used to do that like years ago. They should do that, like upload the opening minutes on YouTube, because I noticed the way that they are promoting stuff on YouTube anyways is they'll do an episode 3 sneak peek. Like for episode 3, it came out today. They released a sneak peek for episode 3 yesterday. I think they should have released a sneak peek last Sunday after episode 2 aired, and then at some point throughout the week, maybe this weekend or something, release the opening minutes. Even earlier in the week, honestly, like I think if people would have saw the opening minutes here of this, people are going to check it out. Like seeing the Walker band, people are going to be like, wait, what's that? Like, it's like this show is just so good. And I do think people just like more people need to give it a chance to go and check it out. Because I know some people are talking about the fact that their ratings are a little bit down, at least compared to Dead City. And they are for sure, at least in terms of cable viewers. I think I'm sure on AMC Plus as well, the ratings and numbers aren't the same as Dead City, which to me is insane because Daryl Dixon is a much better show. But I think it's for one, there is football on Sundays, right? So there is that. So I do think that there's a lot of different contributing factors to it. But yeah, anyways, this was all a bad detour. And Daryl's like, you know what? We're just going to do things my way sort of thing. And so they just continue on walking. They walk by this graveyard and they actually see Jim Morrison's grave. At first, people are Strangers playing, and I was just like, oh, this is really cool. It's a French version. So I was just like, oh, this is really cool. And then we literally run into Jim Morrison's grave. And for me, it was just really cool because my dad has always said, like, my dad really likes seeing like rock stars' graves and stuff like that. Like he likes to go to places where there's like rock star landmarks, basically. And obviously Jim Morrison's grave is one of those, right? And he's always talked about that, like he's buried in Paris, this and that, or at least in France. I'm not entirely sure where exactly he's buried, but he was like, yeah, he's buried out there. It'd be cool to go see his grave at some point, And the fact that this episode actually referenced that, I thought was so cool. And it just sort of, it really shows, like, I think this show so far is really showing us that Daryl really, there's a reason, I guess, people like me, first of all, I guess, really relate with him. Like, he really does like a lot of the same things. Like, he's watching, Mork and Mindy, he's into The Doors, and like there's been a lot of references this season, and like in this episode, he does stand out as a person in general. And the one thing I will say is that he does stand out as a person in general. Like, when he was at the nightclub and he was, there was those two, I guess, I don't know if they were bodyguards or whatever, but they were trying to make that deal with Isabel and Daryl. It was like Daryl's reaction and his whole demeanor during that whole scene was just a little off. Like, Daryl's just sort of an off person in general. Like, you can see why he was sort of an outcast before the apocalypse. Like, he just seems a little awkward sometimes. He doesn't fit in with all of that. He's very much on his own. And it was like the second he went in that nightclub, like, he didn't really look around and think, oh, this is kind of interesting or whatever. For him, he's just like, is this all a distraction? Like, he's looking around and he's like, he's watching people the entire time. And when he does meet those two other characters that are trying to make the deal with him and Isabel, the whole entire time, he just seemed very, very uncomfortable. And I don't know if that's like a Norman Reedus thing, but he just seems so uncomfortable. And like, the one thing I do like, though, is the fact that he's more confident in himself. Like, he's not awkward and shy and just kind of, he's very much like proud of who he is, sort of thing. And he's just kind of, I don't know, he just sort of owns it. He just kind of owns his personality and just who he is. And even later on, with the scene with Quinn and Isabel, like, you can tell Quinn just sort of like, he fits in with this type of lifestyle. Like, it's just sort of who he is. And Daryl, like, he is just sort of who he is, right? And it was just really interesting to see him in a place like this. Like, I think that's the one thing about this show, is that it is really putting Daryl in these really weird situations that feels very different. I mean, obviously, if you've been watching The Walking Dead for a long time, seeing a lot of this, especially episode 3, it felt very off. It felt just, it was so different than anything we've seen in a while. They do run into a new character named Falou, and he is actually a really cool character. I thought he was going to be just an episode 3 character, but it looks like, based off of the trailer for episode 4, he's also going to be in episode 4 as well. So I'm really excited about that. He was a really cool character, and I think his community that he has is likely going to play a role in, I guess, where Laurent is going to end up in episode 4. The pigeon messenger thing I thought was really funny, because Daryl's just like, I'm not waiting a month. And it's actually funny when you're looking at the story. I think this episode for sure really showed, I guess, the motivations or intentions from all the characters. And you really saw that Isabel, I think, was kind of heartbroken that even after kind of all of this, Daryl still wants to leave and go to America. Like, Isabel's saying that Laurent, he's going to be so sad that you're leaving. And I feel like it's more Isabel that's going to be upset about it, because she seems so, like, genuinely hurt by the fact that Daryl is just like, no, I'm going. Like, I'm just going. And she seemed, like, honestly really upset by it. Like, no, like, I think she really wanted him to stay. But Daryl wasn't waiting a month. And I mean, first of all, they found that one character who had the Walker band, and then, they run into Falou, and Falou does have, like, I guess, a messenger or a way to communicate with people, but it's via, I guess, pigeons. And, maybe it takes a couple of days, but it could also take up to a month. And so Daryl's like, I'm not sitting here waiting a month, right? And so we know that Daryl, at this point, he still just kind of wants to leave. Like, there's nothing here where, like, there are moments in the episode where I was thinking maybe he's starting to sort of get this connection with the characters a little bit. I do think at this point, though, he is growing a more stronger connection with Isabel. I think he's starting to learn a lot more about who Isabel is sort of as a person. And I think he is starting to care for her a little bit more. I think it's just sort of, it's taking some time. But I do think, this whole thing with Quinn and everything that happened here, I do think, Daryl got protective there during that scene. And I think this episode was I think that was the point of this episode, was to sort of show that, I guess, true intention from each character. And I do think it started off basically where it was at, where they sort of all want to do their own separate things. But then obviously one person feels this way, the other person feels, another way. And then there's arguing and fighting. And then eventually sort of get down to, I guess, what it's going to end up being. And I think that's why by the end of the episode, you sort of got the impression that Daryl is starting to care a little bit more about, Isabel, Laurent, and whatnot. But I still think it's going to take some more time. And I think him seeing Isabel, Sylvie, and Laurent, and I guess very scary situations where he does have to protect them, I think by episode 6, he is going to want to stay, especially if Carol does show up as well. I think that's going to be, we'll have to wait and see how they sort of make that connection there. We do see Madame Genet and Codron, and they actually do meet for the first time. And this was something that I was speculating on because the trailer makes it seem like they sort of know each other, but just based off of episode 1, it didn't really seem like it. I kind of like the idea of us seeing Codron's rise as a character, right? Like, if he was just like Madame Genet's general and that was just sort of it kind of thing, I feel like that's a little bit more boring. But the fact that he was like this random person out there that sort of ran into Daryl, and then Daryl kills his brother, and then he's like, you know what, I want my revenge, this and that, and then we just sort of see his rise through the ranks, and we see him meet Madame Genet for the first time, and I think that's like actually really, really cool, because I do think over the next couple of seasons and whatnot, I do think they're probably gonna obviously grow a stronger connection and whatnot, and I can see Codron becoming more and more powerful as the seasons go on, because I do think those two characters are probably going to be around for a while. I don't see either one dying this season. I'd be super upset if one of them died. We do see some walker experiments, and it seems like they're just sort of failing at this point, but there is something that is very interesting about the way they move that really, honestly, for me, it just feels very like sci-fi like and very almost robotic, and it's really creepy. There was this one walker. I mean, first of all, there was 2 examples of it in this episode, and I think the second example pretty much confirms my theory on the burners, and that is that they are failed experiments. So we do see this walker in this sort of room, I guess, or whatever, and Madame Genet's, she asks the researcher or the doctor or whatever, like, is everything going good? Are we making progress, whatever? And we see this walker stand up in this very, like, robotic way where it's, like, so fast. I don't want to say it's not human-like, because walkers, I guess you could say they're humans, right? They're like dead humans or whatever, but it's just very not natural. Like, it looks so off. And later on in the episode, we do see a walker like get up in that same exact way, and it was a burner. And so this is sort of one thing that I've been wondering about for a while was, are the burners failed experiments? Because there's burners everywhere, but they're not entirely, they're not the main, I guess, strain of walker. Like, you see them here and there, and they seem to be in certain locations. And so after we saw that, I was like, okay, so that's exactly what it is. And so it's kind of interesting, though, because it looks like, because that one walker sort of stood up in that way, I'm assuming that not all of the walkers that are failed experiments are, I guess, complete failures. There could be more of a spectrum of failure here, right? Like, some could be just completely like whatever, but then on the other end, there's some that, they do have aspects to the variant walkers that are very, very aggressive. And so they're really building up the big reveal of that variant walker that we saw in the trailer, because that walker, I'm sure, is going to move in really unnatural ways that is going to be a lot for Daryl to deal with. They do go to Isabel's old house, and this is where we get the scene, they're broken until the world ended sort of thing. And I thought it was kind of cool to see Isabel's old house. Stuff like this in the first seasons are things that we're going to look back, in the future and be like, oh, that was so cool that we got that, this and that. Like, it's the same thing with The Walking Dead. Going back to season 1, even season 2, they went back to a lot of, old places from before the apocalypse and stuff like that. And it was really cool to see, because obviously later on, the story just goes a certain way. You never really get back to those places. And I thought it was kind of cool to see that. And I do think, Isabel and Daryl really are, I would say, the same character. They come from very, very similar backgrounds. And Isabel, I think, is honestly one of the best Walking Dead characters that we've gotten in a very, very long time. She is such a great character. Like, honestly, there's a part of me that would watch this show just for her alone. Like, if this was just sort of a separate spinoff and she was the lead character, obviously not a lot of people would check it out. I would check it out because it's a Walking Dead spinoff, and I think she can really, she could lead this show. She definitely could. Like, an Isabel standalone episode, even if they were to do that in the future. But Falou does bring them to the nightclub, like I was mentioning earlier in the episode, and it was a really cool scene. The visuals, and again, I mentioned this earlier in the review, but this episode was very much a musical episode, and we do meet this new character named Quinn. I mean, I guess we saw him in episode 2, but it was in a flashback. We actually do get to see him in episode 3, and, his connection with Isabel, and I guess he does sort of reveal in this episode that, I guess him and Lily had a thing back in the day, and he could be Laurent's father. That is actually really interesting, because if he ends up being his father, like that is a lot. That really is a lot. Like Laurent at this point now, you know, I guess that's the thing. Daryl does mention in the episode, like, you can't keep lying to him. You need to tell him about Quinn. I guess if Quinn is, that's the thing, like if Daryl is saying that, then I'm assuming that that is sort of the belief then, is that Quinn is Laurent's father. So, and the thing is, it's not that, you know, unbelievable. It makes a lot of sense because he was around at that time, and Isabel seems so heartbroken by it because obviously I'm assuming Quinn and Isabel were in a relationship or something like that, but she seems so upset by that. And the whole thing here, Daryl saw, you know, Isabel's reaction to this whole thing. And I think Daryl at this point was just like, I mean, he mentioned it in the episode, actually. He was just, he did not like Quinn at all. He really did not like Quinn. And he really stood up for Isabel here. And I think him witnessing that pain, you know, that's the thing. He witnessed a lot of her pain in this episode. Like, even with that girl walker, a lot of little things in this episode. He saw a lot of what she was going through, a lot of who she was beforehand. And I think this is Daryl learning a lot more about Isabel. And I think he started to care for her a lot more in this episode. Codron does show up in the episode at the very end. And there is obviously like this sort of fight that happens. Just beforehand, Daryl and Isabel sort of got into a fight, but Laurent overheard everything. And I don't know exactly how much he heard. I mean, they did talk about a lot of stuff, but I don't know how much of that Laurent's going to hear and be like, okay, so basically he learned everything. Like, he knows now that Quinn is his father, that it's all of this and that or whatever. So we'll have to wait and see, I guess, in episode 4. I guess it makes sense now as to why Laurent is at the Eiffel Tower, because there's that one shot where he's alone, right? That's probably happening in episode 4. So it seems like he runs away and they're trying to find him. And obviously at the end of episode 4, they're likely going to. Codron versus Daryl, I thought was really cool. I think it's cool that these two characters just keep fighting. Like every other episode, they just kind of keep fighting. Daryl won this fight though, and it's actually kind of funny because Daryl, for the most part, is kind of winning all of the fights. Like in episode 1, I would argue he definitely, like, he had to have won that fight. It was more even for sure, but he did scare Codron away. And then in this episode as well, he sort of did the same thing, though I guess Codron's forces and whatnot were shooting at him, so he had to run away. But Daryl was winning that fight. So far, it seems like Daryl's the better fighter. I don't know, kind of feels like that. But then the episode ends with the roof collapsing. And this is the one part of the episode that I thought was just so ridiculous. Like, I was enjoying this episode, really good episode. And then at the very end, he sort of has like this, I don't know, Bugs Bunny moment where he looks down and the floor starts to crack, or the roof starts to crack, and he's like, uh-oh, and he like falls through. But there's like this pause where it's almost like he looks up at the camera. Like, that I thought was just, I mean, maybe that was literally intentional and that was a reference to stuff like that. I mean, it's such a small thing. Obviously, it's a small little detail, but it was just like, yeah, I don't know. It took me out of it just at the very end there, but you know, overall, really good episode. I'm excited for episode 4, so definitely post all your thoughts down below. Hope you guys all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.